Hi, fourth graders. In today's lesson, we are going to be switching to the metric system. So unlike the customary system, which is typically used in the United States, most of the world's countries use the metric system. The metric system uses powers of 10. You'll see what I mean by this in this lesson and in the next few lessons. Just as we did before, make sure you jot down today's title and learning goal. The learning goal says, I can estimate and measure length to the nearest centimeter and choose the most appropriate metric unit for measuring length. Just like we did last week, we're going to study three main measurements. The first one is length. The next one is capacity. And in the customary system, we usually think of weight. However, in the metric system, we use the word mass instead. As you can see in the title, today we're focusing on length. Remember, length is the distance between 2 points. Sometimes these lengths are very small, like you learned before with inches, or sometimes they are much, much larger, like using miles. However, inches and miles are not found in the metric system. Instead, everything connects to the word meter. A meter is the same as about 1 yard or about 3 feet. Some of the metric system units are close to the customary system units. However, very few of them are exact conversions. In your vocabulary lessons with Miss Pattis, you have been learning about prefixes and suffixes. In the metric system, the measurement is dependent upon what prefix is attached to the base word. So meter is the base. If I want to talk about something very, very small, I'm going to use the prefix milli, or in this case would be a millimeter. Something slightly bigger, closer to an inch, would be the prefix centi, or centimeter. This is probably the distance you're most familiar with because you've used rulers before. Slightly bigger is what's considered a decimeter. It's not very common, but it is good to know. And on the flip side, we have a much, much larger unit, which uses the prefix kilo, or in this case, kilometer. You probably have heard of this distance. For those of you that like running, or maybe your parents enjoy running, you might have heard of a 3K or a 5K or a 10K. Those are all measurements of kilometers. Let's organize this into a chart to help us better understand. Here I have arranged each of the units in order from least to greatest. Let's jot down a few notes to help us remember about how big each of these are. Let's say you have a dime. A millimeter is the thickness of a dime. Next, a centimeter is about the size of a ladybug. To help you imagine the length of a meter, you might imagine the size of a medium snake. And last but not least, a kilometer is about the same as 4 city blocks. Remember, as I mentioned before, a lot of these connections are estimates. They're not exactly equal when you're looking to see each of these units in real life. However, one thing that is exact is how the units relate to each other. So let me tell you a little bit more. Let's start with a meter. That's our base unit. Inside of 1 meter would be 10 decimeters. Inside 1 meter would be 100 centimeters. And inside 1 meter would be 1,000 millimeters. What you can notice about the metric system that is much easier than the customary system is that everything has to do with powers of 10. Milli, centi, and deci all have prefixes that connect to how many units are in 1 meter. Notice also the patterns of zeros. On the other hand, a kilometer is equal to 1,000 meters. So if I had 1,000 meters, that would be the same as 1 kilometer. A final thing that you should notice to help you with practicing units of length in the metric system are the units. So notice a small m and a small n mean millimeter. Small c, small m, centimeter. DCM is decimeter, and then kilometer is usually abbreviated km. What's nice about this is that they each have a small m or a lowercase m that help us remember the base unit, a meter. To help us picture or practice these different units of length in the metric system, let's imagine several different real-life objects. If I were to measure the height of the house, which would be most appropriate? Well, I certainly don't want to measure in something teeny tiny because I'm going to need a lot of those units. And I certainly don't want to use a kilometer because that would be huge. So an appropriate unit for a house would be using a meter. Let's try another one. How about the length of a cat? The length of a cat would probably be most appropriately measured in a centimeter. Perhaps a decimeter depending on how big it is, but a centimeter would often be the most appropriate unit. Now let's picture a sunflower seed, a very, very, very tiny seed. We probably would want to measure a sunflower seed using millimeters, especially if we're only talking about how wide they are. And for sure, this next one you'll know. If I want to measure the distance that a plane is traveling, most appropriately I should use a kilometer. While I know sometimes these units of measurement lessons can be somewhat short and still be covering complex information, the nice thing that we have with remote learning is that you are always welcome to do some research on Google or other kid-friendly platforms that can help you start to picture and imagine these different units, as well as even convert some of these units. So don't be afraid as you're moving into this harder system, the metric system, one that we're not as accustomed to. Use the resources that you have. And lastly, remember that it's okay to make mistakes. Oftentimes I'll be posting the answer keys to help you understand how you've done. And sometimes it's difficult to say what the best estimate is because the visuals that we have in our head might look slightly different than others. So, for instance, if you're given a problem and you say that the answer is centimeters, when in actuality the answer key says millimeters, that's more reasonable than if you were to say centimeters and the answer would be kilometers. So remember that with measurement, even though it's important to be able to measure precisely, sometimes with estimating or with checking for reasonableness, it's okay if you're in the general ballpark.
Hey guys, instead of a joke today, I'm going to share with you my favorite math meme. It reminds me of myself when I was a fourth grader.
See you for tomorrow's lesson.